The Magdalene, an original short story by Jared I. McGee. Rory stared at the shot of whiskey making a cascade of bubbles in her double pint stein of PBR. No, the whatever swanky small batch shit these people were drinking by the keg. The beer disturbed from her having dropped the small vessel of liquor into her beverage at the sincere, vivacious urging of her peers. Ah, her peers. She was having a blast tonight. This party that her cousin's workmate had invited them to had sounded like it might be okay at best. But man, oh man, this party was lit beyond anything she had imagined possible. Her cousin worked in travel, not exactly a booming industry these days. Still, the party was something out of The Wolf of Wall Street or some such film. This was fiction come to life. At least 400 people were here at the sizable home of somebody's friend of a friend. That alone was impressive for what was billed as just a small party in southwest rural Georgia. Add in the pools. That's right, pools plural. The hot tubs, the tennis courts, the game rooms, the mini movie theater set up outside near the pool with the waterfall. That's right, the pool with the waterfall. Not the pool that had its deck turned into a foam party with clothing being optional. Add in all of that, and wow. In truth, the exercise in excess was something on the other side of intimidating to her. She had been teaching high school math in a very small town 3 towns over for the past 5 years of her life. Essentially, she graduated from the University of Georgia and zipped straight down to that small town life full of scrutiny and microscopes and standards that seemed all but inhuman to a girl that had once won the Queen of Sleaze competition from the Joint Greek Life Association. Her 4 years in Athens had seen her take part in any and every opportunity for debauchery that she could get her hands on. She'd grown up under the firm thumb of her Pentecostal grandfather, and, though the family had long since lapsed from actually attending services, the archaic, arbitrary, and utterly patriarchal systems in place to keep young women chaste and temperate and submissive had her ready to go wild once she hit the university steps. She'd also loved that UG was in Athens. Growing up poor, Rory had never had the opportunity to travel, but she liked to think of this Athens as the Athens, particularly the Athens of old. When themed parties came around, she pushed the sororities and fraternities over which she had some sway by about year 2 for cheesy themes living up to their town's name. Gods and goddesses, myths and monsters, ancient Greece, the 300, and of course, the classic but more simplistic toga party, just to name a few. At those parties, if there was liquor to be quaffed in unhealthy quantities, she was the first in line. If there were drugs to be smoked, popped, or snorted, she'd woo with the best of them and start the smoking, popping, or snorting rolling. She did draw the line at needles and meth, though. She wasn't stupid after all. If there are men or women that needed to take in some carnal delights, be it one-on-one or in more of a group setting, she was happy to share her body with whoever was down to fuck, suck, or generally get naughty. That louche and libertine Rory made both friends and enemies in spades. By the time she graduated then, she was equal parts tears and flip-off fuck yous to be leaving the institution. In retrospect, she should have probably shrugged off the latter for more of the former. The half-decade she'd been Miss Rory Daniels at the school had been quite good for her financially. That much she could not argue or poo-poo away, At least that's what her pop and grandma had convinced her anyway. Not that their poor dirt farming standards were precisely what Rory wanted to use as her bar, mind you, but they were right that she was paying what few student loans she had and getting all of her ducks in a row across the board in all things fiscal. But money in her savings, her bills and rent paid, and a decent lease on a nice car only went so far. In fact, the middle of year 2, she found herself longing for ramen noodles cooked in a shoddy 10th-hand microwave in a rundown apartment that she shared with 7 other girls and their lovers du jour. She'd embrace it all again if she could stop this seemingly inevitable march toward becoming a boring suburban housewife. Oh yes, the housewife part. The most challenging point of her half-decade of this new identity was the 2-year stint with Michael Michaels. Looking back, she couldn't believe that she had fell for Mikey, as he liked to be called, if for no other reason than that ridiculous name of his. Pam and Gerald were sweet and all, but she really would never understand what brought 2 intelligent, relatively cool parents to name their child Michael Orville Michaels. Poor Mikey's initials were even Mom. And Rory Michaels? She'd always dreamt that she'd be able to use the old practice of ditching her maiden name for something a bit spicier than Daniels, so the swap of Daniels to Michaels wasn't exactly appealing either. The relationship itself had been fine. In fact, Mikey was probably the man that she dated that treated her the best, the most like she was constantly told she should want to be treated by men. He opened doors, he paid for meals, he respected her more than she herself felt anyone should have to do so. Everything about the relationship was what it was supposed to be, as per small-town Georgia, as per her school-teacher friends, as per Pentecostal ministers, as per television and movies, as per damn near everyone but Rory Daniels. For example, Mikey was far from prudish, but when she asked him to put a belt around her throat while he fucked her from behind, he acted like she'd slapped him. When she wanted to buy Coke on a recent weekend away in Daytona just to be frisky together, he'd sweated bullets and whined like a child, scared of the law. When she'd brought a girl that she would have loved to have eat her out back to their table at Frondway's, a local dance club and martini bar, he'd flushed and couldn't meet her gaze for a week, much less have sex together. This new life of hers was vanilla, bland, gray. Whatever it was, it lacked any of the spark that once defined every moment of her existence. Toward the end, she'd made excuses to go to parties and meet other men. She never really cheated on Mikey, but she certainly pushed the boundary to the maximum. Eventually, Mikey got sick of playing third fiddle to other more important things in her life, and he ended things. Not quite amicably, but far from in heat and hatred either. So all in all, Rory found their split to be an extremely positive step for her in her life. As she now stood in a mansion in her translucent white bikini top and neon pink hole-ridden miniskirt with cocaine fueling her speeding thoughts, modified Boilermaker in hand, she found her thoughts errant, wandering back to Mikey and the always overtly warm and generous Pam and Gerald Michaels, and her friends at the high school that were so straight-laced but so kind, and the pride in her grandparents' eyes upon her new reformation and redemption, and the infinite number of paths her life could have taken and still could take. The surprise almost knocked her on her heels. That she should be reminiscing over this last lackluster period of her life while she was out living, finally living again, was confounding to her. The chanting around her brought her fully back to the present. Someone had spun the big dare or dare game wheel. They'd spun chug plus lose a article of clothing. Every other option of the 24 pegged board had chug listed too. Every fourth option had something regarding getting people closer to naked. Every single option had a spelling or grammar mistake. The other 6 current Dare or Dare participants, 4 girls and 2 guys, wooed up a storm, throwing back their Boilermakers, chugging as per instructions. As for the second part of the orders, 3 of the girls decided to lose their tops. The 4th girl went to take off her skirt, leaving only some expensive lingerie bottoms for her to flounce about in, her top already having been off. Both guys, already shirtless as well, chose to lose their shorts. One had the luxury of boxers, the other did not. Thus was the danger of a stripping game at a pool party. The attention of all the onlookers zipped over to her, the queen of sleaze herself. Rory hesitated, another long moment, the cheers growing in volume and the looks of confusion growing in number. Then, she consciously said goodbye to Mrs. Rory Michaels, burying her in that moment. Chugged her Boilermaker, unclasped her bikini top, throwing it to the crowd, eliciting a roar from them, and made a beeline for the poor schmuck that had lost his only piece of clothing to the game and was standing there with a growing look of trepidation, now that his courageous act was growing cold. She backed him up aggressively, finally pushing him to where he fell back onto a nearby pool table. Rory put her hair up with the black tie that she'd had around her left wrist for just such an occasion, made a "do you want more" hand motion to the gathered crowd, cupping her right hand to her ear as if she needed even more of a reaction, then bent at the waist, ensuring everyone behind her had a nice view up her skirt, and put Boxerless Joe's cock in her mouth. And hearing nothing but adoration and admiration erupt from the now full-on rock concert-sized crowd growing around the little game area. She was in her element. Rory only thought of that other path she'd been on but for a second as she continued sucking and moving her hips for the crowd. She shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged at some swank party, and Rory, she took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Thank you for listening to The Magdalene. The 2 backing tracks for this story were taken from the Free Music Archive and are both by Fleshlit. The first track is Detour Ahead, and it is its own collection in the archive. The second track is Whack, and it is also its own collection in the archive. They are being used under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 international licenses. Thank you to Fleshlit and the Free Music Archive for giving the world access to these tracks. Next up, please stick around for the second installment of Sunball, a multi-part story begun last week. This week's continuance is titled Percench.